Let me tell you a story. Let me write you a symphony. We'll speak so sincerely. Build a dream so honey sweet. Feel the heartbeats together. We rise like stars in the sky.
Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is named The Book with Two Titles, Waves of Fate and Whispers of Will.
3, 2, 1.
Rain pounded the pavement as Shorelle Branson darted through the unfamiliar streets, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. "I just don't know what to do," she said, her voice barely audible over the downpour. "I'll call you back." She spotted a weathered sign swinging in the wind. Cross Paths with Stories, a library of books. Without hesitation, Shorelle ducked inside the library. If it could be called that. It was more like a small bookstore. The interior was dimly lit and filled with the musty scent of old paper. Dust motes danced in the few beams of light that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. Shorelle's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the towering shelves crammed with books of all sizes and colors, some of their titles more legible than others. "Hello," she called out, wringing the water from her jacket and tucking her phone back into the pocket of her trousers. A rustling sound came from behind the counter, followed by a soft thud. An elderly man with wispy white hair and thick glasses peered over at her.
"Oh, hello there,"
he said, his voice creaky but warm.
"Welcome to Cross Paths with Stories. I'm Theodore."
Shorelle smiled politely. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Theodore. I'm just waiting out the rain, if that's all right." She was careful not to give her name, and glad she didn't have to since he hadn't asked. Mr. Theodore nodded and said enthusiastically,
"Oh yes, of course it is. A rain-dodging customer is better than no customer, I'd say."
He was a chipper old man, she could tell. He walked over to the counter, bent over a little like he was reaching for something. Shorelle stiffened momentarily, wondering if she had misread her host. She was on high alert. Her eyes beaming to the door. When he straightened, she could feel herself and particularly her tense muscles easing as he pulled out a plump, golden hamster.
"This is Smitches.
He said, stroking the creature's fur.
He's not much for conversation, but he's excellent company."
She sat down at one of the provided benches that was closest to the door. As she sat, she scanned the room. It had been a while since she read a book. She wanted to look around, but before she did, she texted her mother and a friend, telling them where she was. She said she was waiting out the rain and would call them in an hour. She asked if they could call her if they didn't hear from her within that time. She did not want to worry them, but this was a part of town that was unfamiliar to her, and the neighborhood seemed a little shady. She felt comfortable enough to leave the bench and proceeded to look around the store. She made her way through many sections of the store. She picked up a couple of books, read through a few of their pages, and along the way, she found two books that interested her. She was making her way past a couple of the aisles when her phone rang. An hour had passed. She quickly picked up and reassured her mom that she was fine. She explained that she had simply lost track of time. "Can you call me back in another hour, Mom?" The rain still had not stopped. And even seemed to be intensifying. Her mom asked if she still felt safe there, and she said yes, as evidenced by the fact that she had immersed herself in the books she was reading and inspecting, that she had forgotten to make the call as she promised.
Are you sure you can't get an Uber out there, Shorey?
Her mom inquired, worried. "Yes, Mom, I've tried. Don't worry. I'll get the bus when the rain takes a break, or at least reduces to a drizzle." No sooner had she dropped the call with her mom that her friend's call came in. She went through the same process of apologizing for not calling, explaining what had happened, and reassuring her and asking for the same check-in in another hour. As she approached the counter where Mr. Theodore was feeding Smitches a snack, she exchanged a friendly smile with him as he acknowledged her presence.
See anything you like back there, dearie?
"Yes, I got a couple of these," she responded. "Although one of them doesn't have a price tag. I checked."
Ah, yes. Sorry. Sometimes that happens. I'm old, you know. Sometimes I miss a few of them.
He apologized.
Let me check the price for you.
As he analyzed her finds and rummaged around, her gaze was drawn to a section of shelves marked "For borrowing only, not for sale." One book in particular seemed to call to her. Its spine was a swirl of deep blue and silver, shimmering as if it contained actual water. "May I look over there?" she asked, pointing at the reserved section. Mr. Theodore nodded, a curious glint in his eyes.
You may,
he said. Shorelle carefully pulled the book from the shelf. The cover bore the title, "Ways of Fate and Chance," in elegant, flowing script. But as she watched, the letters seemed to ripple and change. If it had just simply faded, she might have thought that it was a type of a glossy print effect that some books had, where you had to hold them in a certain direction in order to make them more legible. No, this was not like that. It was not a mere fade. What happened was that the first title had all but disappeared, and a second title appeared beneath it and read, "Whispers of Will and Choice." "Fascinating," she murmured. Impressed, she opened the book to a random page this time, close to the beginning of the book. Shorelle began to read. Eira stood atop the city walls, her heart pounding as she watched the approaching army. Tahan, the conqueror, and his forces stretched intimidatingly as far as the eyes could see, a sea of glinting armor and fluttering banners. She knew what their arrival meant, the end of her world as she knew it. Her fingers brushed the promised necklace hidden beneath her cloak, a gift from her beloved, Orplan. She closed her eyes, remembering his promise to return and save their people. But as the first siege engines rolled into view, Eira feared that it might be too late. Shorelle's phone began to buzz, startling her from the story. She grabbed it hurriedly from her jean pocket, too shocked to believe that another hour had passed so soon. If it had, she would hate to have her mom and friend worry about her all over again. Thankfully, it was simply a text from her boss. It read, "Decision on merger expected tomorrow. Be prepared." She sighed, the weight of her own dilemma settling back on her shoulders. Stay with the company under new management, or leave and risk unemployment? The parallel between her situation and Ira's was not lost on her. Shorelle turned back to the book. She tried to find the page she was on, but her eyes fell on a different scene. The words had changed. Tahan, the conqueror, stood before Ira, his dark eyes appraising her.
"You have a choice,"
he said, his voice low and dangerous.
"Become my wife, ensure peace for your people, or refuse and watch your city burn."
Shorelle's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Mr. Theodore, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "This book," she began. "It's incredible. I'd like to buy it, along with the others, if I could." Mr. Theodore shook his head.
I'm afraid not. It's a collector's item. One of the few I can't part with permanently. But,
he added, seeing her disappointment.
you're welcome to borrow it.
Shorelle hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I like that very much," she said. As she filled out the form to borrow the book, giving a slightly altered version of her address, Mr. Theodore explained the small return insurance fee.
You'll get back 90% of it if you return it on or before the date specified,
he assured her. Shorelle paid the fee without hesitation, making sure to leave any change that remained from what she had paid, wondering if she'd ever find her way back to this strange little shop. She was almost sure she may not be returning the book. The rain had finally stopped. As she left the store, she reached for her phone again as she made her way to the bus stop. "Hey, Mom." As they chatted happily, she was glad to be safely leaving that neighborhood, but she was also glad that she had come and found so many books that she was excited to read. Little did she know, her journey, much like Ira's, was only at its beginning. Shorelle hurried to her office, the borrowed book tucked safely in her bag. As she walked, she skipped remnants of the rain that seemed to spare no part of the city. Today, thankfully, the sky had cleared, only leaving behind puddles that reflected the world in fractured images. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life, like those reflections, was about to be reassembled. At her desk, Shorelle tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting to the strange book. During her lunch break, she couldn't resist opening it again. Ira paced the length of her chambers, the weight of Tahan's ultimatum heavy on her shoulders. Outside she could hear the nervous chatter of her people, their fear palpable. A soft knock on the door startled her. "My lady?" Her handmaid, Lyra, whispered. "A message from Orplan." Yaira's heart leapt. She took the folded parchment with trembling hands. Hope and dread warring within her. Shorelle's own phone buzzed, making her jump. It was a company-wide email announcing a mandatory meeting the next day. She glanced around the office, noting the tense expressions on her co-workers' faces. The parallels to Yaira's situation were becoming uncanny. As the day wore on, Shorelle found herself stealing glances at the book. Each time she looked, the title seemed to shift, sometimes emphasizing ways of fate, other times whispers of will. It was as if the book itself couldn't decide which force held more sway. That evening, curled up on her couch, Shorelle delved deeper into Yaira's story. Orplan's message was brief but clear. "Hold fast, my love. I have a plan." Yaira clutched the note to her chest, torn between relief and anxiety. She trusted Orplan with her life, but could she trust him with the fate of her entire city? A commotion in the courtyard drew her to the window. Tahan's soldiers were setting up camp, their presence a constant reminder of the choice that loomed before her. As she watched, one of Tahan's captains, a brutish man named Gormick, barked orders at his subordinates. Something about the way he moved, the glint in his eyes, set Yaira on edge. "My lady," Lyra said softly, "what will you do?" Yaira turned to the window, her resolve hardening. "I will do what I must for my people. I hope that perhaps there is a way to shape our fate without merely accepting it." Shorelle closed the book, her mind whirling. She thought about her own situation, the impending merger, the uncertain future. Like Yaira, she felt caught between loyalty and self-preservation. But maybe, just maybe, there was a third option she hadn't considered yet. She only hoped she could figure it out before it was too late. She fell asleep that night with the book on her nightstand, its dual titles shimmering in the moonlight. In her dreams, she saw herself standing on city walls, looking out at a vast army. But when she looked down, she was holding not a sword, but her company's ID badge. The next morning dawned gray and uncertain. Shorelle dressed for work with extra care, aware that today could change everything. As she sipped her coffee, she couldn't resist reading another passage from the mysterious book. Tahan the Conqueror strode through the captured city, his dark eyes missing nothing. Yaira walked beside him, her posture rigid, her face a carefully crafted mask of calm. She was buying time, waiting for a sign from Orplan, but with each passing moment, her hope dwindled.
"Your city is impressive,"
Tahan remarked, his voice deceptively casual.
"It would be a shame to see it destroyed."
Yaira's step faltered for just a moment. Indeed, my lord, our people have much to offer as allies rather than as conquered subjects. Tahan's laugh was sharp and sudden.
Clever girl. But remember, I hold your fate in my hands.
As they rounded a corner, Yaira caught a glimpse of a hooded figure in the shadows, working hard to remain unseen. Her heart leapt. Orplin! It was a lucky thing that Tahan's eyes, though keen, were not familiar enough with the terrain, and seemed too distracted to notice the little things that her expert eyes, that were overly familiar with the structure and movement of the landscape, would find difficult to miss. It was a landscape that had been canvassed in her mind after years of riding through these paths thousands of times. She worked hard not to react, looking for a way to signal at him in some familiar fashion that only he would understand. But before she could, Captain Gormick appeared, blocking her view.
My lord,
Gormick said, bowing low to Tahan.
everything is prepared for tonight's celebration.
The way he said celebration sent a chill down Yaira's spine. She glanced back, but the hooded figure was gone. Had it been real, or just a trick of her desperate mind? Shorelle closed the book, her own anxiety mirroring Yaira's. She tucked it back into her bag, feeling as though she might need its strange comfort during the days ahead. Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Whispered conversations ceased abruptly.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
When managers walked by. Shorelle's boss, Mrs. Ramin, looked particularly haggard, her usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled. Shorelle, Miss Ramin called. A word in my office, please? Heart pounding, Shorelle followed her boss. As she sat down, she couldn't help but feel like Yaira facing Tahan, caught between forces larger than herself. Mrs. Ramin sighed heavily. I'll be blunt. The merger is happening, and it's not going to be pretty. I've been told to cut the staff by 30%. I'm fighting it, but she trailed off, looking older than Shorelle had ever seen her. What can we do? Shorelle asked, surprising herself with her steadiness. Mrs. Ramin gave a tired smile. That's what I've always liked about you, Shorelle. You ask the right questions. But now, keep this to yourself. All we can do is start thinking about what makes our team indispensable. We need to prove our worth, and fast. Her mind was racing. She thought of Yaira, searching for a way to save her people. She thought of the book's shifting titles, fate and will intertwined. During her lunch break, she opened the book again, hoping for inspiration. Yaira slipped away from the celebration, her heart pounding. Tahan had announced the wedding dates for Yaira and a few other maidens that had been paraded before him to be his wives. The daughters of other noble families were also promised to his hand-picked officials. She had asked permission to step out as the announcements continued to riotous cheers from their drunken captors. She made her way to the kitchen as the gods questioned why she was pacing and loitering. She rushed to hide in a wine cellar that had a secret passageway that led out to a hidden corner of the garden. She shrieked as she saw it covered in cobwebs, due to its many years of disuse. During times of peace, no one ever needed hidden passages. However, the tyrant out there frightened her far more than any spiders ever could. She knew the tunnels well, because her father had made sure she could navigate them. He practiced regularly with her, well into her teens. He was a careful man, and he didn't want to have an exit that no one knew how to use. She tightened her grip around the little torch she had liberated from one of the mantles outside. Still, this alternative was scary enough that she had to take a moment to catch her breath. As she steadied herself, so she wouldn't faint at the sight of the cobwebs, she made her way through the maze of the tunnels. As she emerged from its walls, she hid the torch in case she had to return by the tunnels for any reason, and she began casting aside the vines that grew alongside the castle walls, careful not to destroy them and draw attention to the secret crevices that they slyly provided camouflage for. This secret passageway must remain secret after all. She overheard something, unsure at first, but soon it began to sound like something ominous. A plot, whispered between a voice she was almost sure was Gormic's and some of his other men. But the details were hazy. She didn't know who to trust or what to do. As the conversation progressed, she felt she had heard enough to deduce what was really going on. As it seemed their conversation was coming to an end, she began to slowly back away, hoping to slip away unnoticed. As she rounded a corner, a hand grabbed her suddenly. She spun, ready to fight, only to find herself face to face with Orplan.
Yaira,
Surprise evident in his voice.
I've been trying to reach you. We don't have much time. What are you doing here?
Orplan! Orplan, listen, Yaira said urgently. I think Gormic is planning something against Dahan. Orplan's eyes widened.
This could be our chance. But we'll have to be careful. One wrong move.
I know, and we'll seal our fate. Or perhaps this is our fate, a chance to rewrite our own destiny. Shorelle closed the book, a plan beginning to form in her mind. She thought about the company's notoriously glitchy system, the one that had caused so many headaches over the years. What if... a drill to train the team. A few years ago, glitches. She stood up, determination rising up within her. Like Yaira, she would find a way to save her colleagues. Shorelle could have sworn she saw the book's cover shimmer for the first time, revealing both titles together as one, glimmering with equal brightness for just a moment. She smiled to herself, ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, Shorelle's plan began to take shape. She knew the company's old system like the back of her hand, including its tendency to glitch at some of the worst possible moments. If she could somehow, during the merger negotiations, demonstrate just how crucial the existing team was to keeping things running smoothly in the company. While she worked, Shorelle's thoughts kept drifting back to Yaira and Orplan. During a quick coffee break, she snuck another peek at the book. Eira and Orplin moved through the shadows of the conquered city, their hearts racing. They had pieced together Gormic's plan. The captain had intended to assassinate Tahan during the night's festivities, perhaps intending to pin the blame on the city's people to justify a brutal retaliation. "We have to stop him," Eira whispered. "But how? If we warn Tahan directly, he might not believe us, or worse, he might think it's a trick." Orplin's face was grim in the dim light.
Then we don't warn him. We catch Gorik in the act.
As they crept closer to the great hall where the celebration was being held, Eira felt the weight of chance pressing down on them. One wrong move, one stroke of bad luck, and everything could fall apart. Shorelle closed the book, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Her own plan felt just as precarious as Eira's. So much could go wrong, but the potential payoff was worth the risk. She knew that. Shorelle made her move. The new management had ordered that no staff was permitted to interrupt the ongoing meeting. Shorelle thought they were too reckless, coming into a new environment and dismissing those who were more familiar with the terrain. She cared about their clients, and a badly handled glitch would affect so many lives and potentially ruin the business. She needed a way to point out this folly and hopefully save her friends' jobs. She saw that their foolishness would be like a poison to them, and she hoped that, like Eira, she could allow things play out long enough to help set things right again. Early on, when the plan was still taking shape, she had one of her tech buddies create a duplicate program of one of the incidents that had happened during a major glitch episode. She had him layer it over the actual system that would eventually trigger a dummy alarm. She was banking on the new management's inexperience, hoping to buy some time before they realized that it was all a ruse. The glitch often caused the system to continuously duplicate and overwrite client and company information with outdated and erroneous data. Before the company got a handle on it and had trained its staff on appropriate protocols, the malfunction was often called the itch glitch, and often resulted in client records becoming corrupted, leading to crucial errors in transactions and a loss of sensitive information. It carried the name itch because it spread like an itch, and the corrupted data was constantly being processed and reprocessed, compounding the problem. It would overwhelm the company's automated alert system, flooding it with error messages. The alarms were repetitive and had been purposely made annoying by the development team so that they could never successfully ignore them. As the preset time for the malfunction drew near, Shorelle's stomach was in knots. She found a quiet corner of the office to open the book once more, hoping to use it to relax her nerves. Eira's mind raced. They needed to expose Gormic without tipping him off prematurely. She whispered to one of her trusted maids to create a gossip chain about the king's goblet being poisoned. She gave her some specific instructions and then quickly dismissed her. The great hall was a swirl of color and noise. Filled with Tahan's victorious soldiers and the city's defeated nobles. Eira moved through the crowd, her senses on high alert. Orplin was somewhere nearby, watching and waiting. She spotted Gormick near one of the side entrances, his hand resting suspiciously on his sword's hilt. Tahan was standing up, making his way from the center of the room, laughing boisterously, clearly oblivious to the danger. He spoke to one of the guards. She recognized him as one of those who had stopped her when she left the party earlier. He's probably looking for me, she thought to herself. The maid knew just who needed to hear it first, because over the days of their captivity, she had noticed that one of the female courtiers was a relative to one of the king's closest guards. It took a while, but the story eventually seemed to get to the king.
What?
Tahan bellowed.
Who dares attempt to poison me?
Gasps reverberate throughout the whole room. As everyone's faces was plastered with surprised expressions, Gormick's was the only one that seemed as frozen as stone. Eira noticed that he was very likely frantic. He was trying to control himself, but to the unassuming, his demeanor might have been misread as surprise and concern for the king. The king asked for the source of the information to be traced. Every individual in the chain stepped forward, and they were quick to mention who they heard it from, eager to relieve themselves of any responsibility and shift the blame to another's shoulders. It took some time, but the inquiry finally got to the maid that Eira had spoken to. Nervously, the young girl began. I had gone into the gardens to feed the palace dogs when I stumbled on the plot, sire. The girl recounted the cover story that Eira had given her to perfection.
You see those conspirators?
Tahan asked eagerly. Though it was dark, I am quite sure that I could recognize at least one of the faces, sire. His voice was distinct because it was that of a foreigner, and he spoke as one with high position.
So you are saying that one of my own men has made this plot? Why should I believe you, when you have every reason to lie to me?
I dare not lie to you, O king. I only ask that you investigate if there is any truth to my claims. I only wish to have helped save the king's life, she said. Tahan had his ranking officials, starting from the least, paraded before the girl. Gormick was a higher-up, so it would take some time to get to him. The maid had been instructed not to quickly point out Gormick, so as not to raise suspicion or give him reasons to feel endangered and thus act rashly. As the pool narrowed, Gormick brought up the suggestion that the goblet should be tested to find out if it was indeed poisoned. He probably spoke out of desperation, eager to reaffirm his care for the king. But he had, unknowingly, given the maid the perfect opportunity to single him out without it looking too random.
That voice. That was the voice I heard, sire.
Silence, you inconsequential fool! How dare you?
Gormick said, mustering as much stability as he could to help his voice sound convincing.
Now I know you're lying. Gormick?
Tahan said. The maid continued, stating that she could prove it. She mentioned that since it had rained that day, and that though much of the palace was paved, the gardens were not, and therefore they were muddy. She raised up her muddied shoes, the shoes she had made sure to plaster with mud that Eira's shoes had gathered during their time in the garden. Eira had then proceeded to wash off the rest of it from her shoes because she didn't want to be accidentally implicated in case Tahan or one of his men decided to investigate more thoroughly. She knew that if there was mud on her shoes, that would raise further questions and, worse still, lessen Gormick's appearance of guilt. Indeed, Gormick and only a few others in the hall had muddied shoes as well. That went further to prove the maid's story, as it indicated that they were at least in similar places. Eira concluded that perhaps many of the other muddied shoes belonged to his co-conspirators. This was not particularly good for their plan, because any doubts about identity could make it easy for Gormick to lump off the blame onto a subordinate, using them as a willing or unwilling fall guy. Faced with this, Gormick began to mumble.
This proves nothing. Yes, I was in the gardens, but only to check out the perimeters and ensure the king's safety. It is an unfortunate coincidence, sire. Will my good deed be used to fault me? Will it be used by my enemies to turn the king's anger against his trusted servant?
Muddied shoes
Tahan nodded.
do not prove treason.
He was firm in his retort.
How do you expect me to make such a jump in logic?
Sire, the maid began, I have proved 3 things, actually. First, that it was indeed a foreigner. Second, a high-ranking official. And that, thirdly, that they had been in the garden.
Silence, you!
Gormick retorted harshly.
Perhaps the goblet might clear things up.
A voice shouted from the distance. It was one of the people that had been testing the goblet to see if it was indeed poisoned. The test was being carried out at a visible corner of the hall, serving as a backdrop to all the commotion that had been going on. The owner of the voice stepped forward to reveal that the goblet had indeed been poisoned with galliflare. It was a well-known poison, and it was made with ingredients and substances that were only readily available among Tahan's tribe.
Very few know our ways, Gormick. How do you explain this? The cup was indeed poisoned, and by a poison from our homeland.
No, that's not possible. It can't be.
Gormick mumbled in disbelief.
Sire!
Arrest him!
Tahan shouted, his voice thunderous with rage.
No! Think about it, sire. If it was me, Why would I use galley flare? Something that could be traced to me. Maybe you were desperate.
No, maybe he was careless. Or just plain stupid.
Some members of the crowd chipped in.
You can explain yourself later.
Tahan shouted. Gormick pulled out his sword, swinging it swiftly to keep the approaching guards away.
Put the sword down, Gormick.
Tahan yelled. Gormick shouted.
Attack! Now!
A few soldiers stepped forward. Gormick looked around as if expecting more of his comrades than the number that seemed to present themselves.
Cowards!
He cursed,
You swore to me.
his eyes searching the crowd. A fight ensued. Gormick and his men fought, although they were greatly outnumbered, so the fight did not last long. In a last-ditch effort, he flung his dagger at the king, nearly hitting him. Orplan deflected it. Very soon he was quickly subdued, surrounded, and the treacherous captain was wrestled to the ground. He looked Orplan angrily in the eyes, shouting, You! As he was being pulled away, he continued to curse Orplan, the king, his former comrades, the maid, and nearly anyone in sight. Shorelle's reading was interrupted by the commotion in the office. It was time. She looked up to see several executives from the takeover company striding in, followed by Mrs. Romain and other senior staff. Many of the old staffers had previously been asked to clear out their desks, so the office was emptier than usual, and the few people that came that day had done so mainly to bid farewell to each other and holding out a little hope to see how the meetings would end. They had been specifically instructed to be quiet while the meeting was in progress, so when the commotion erupted, they sat still. They watched as screens flickered, data scrambled, and the alarms flared. This caught the new management off guard, as they had earlier sent in some of their experienced technicians to come and familiarize themselves with the system, as well as to collect the manuals, passwords, and other keys to the systems. This handover had occurred earlier, so none of those technicians were here. The members of the new team that were there scurried around for several minutes. The lead negotiator was frantic on the phone. They had Skyped in some of their experts, and they had begun to talk some of their more lay colleagues through some steps, hoping to isolate the cause of the glitch. They seemed to hope to analyze the system's logs and identify patterns and triggers that was associated with this sudden data corruption. None of their suggestions worked. Though the alarm was a gimmick, the problems it presented had truly occurred once. Shorelle remembered the time when it first happened, and how it had taken the old staffers hours to fix it. She smiled silently to herself. Now she knew that even the least tech-savvy among them could handle this glitch in less than 30 minutes. Their tech guys could do it in 5. This was because of years of tireless work and learning the ropes. Their software specialists had run tests, developed a patch, and even introduced updates to correct the recursive errors by modifying the algorithm responsible for the aggregation of the data to prevent the errors in feedback. They also introduced regular checks and other monitoring systems that could have worked better if they were a bigger company and properly funded. It was their lack of funds that put them on this crossroads and opened them up for the takeover. But with what little they had, their staff had been trained well enough to recognize and handle the glitches. They had been instructed and had begun to familiarize themselves with various debugging techniques and responsive protocols. They had to be able to do things themselves, as they couldn't afford programmers or software engineers as permanent staff. An hour passed and the data, in quotes, was being compromised, or so they thought. Soon, the team that had been called in by the new management arrived at the office. They began to work on it in person. The new manager, Guy, finally swung open the doors and yelled out for help, asking if any among the old staffers had encountered this kind of situation before. The members of the old team said yes, almost in unison, reassuring them that it could be fixed. Shorelle watched as her colleagues sprang into action. Their expertise evident as they worked to contain the glitch. She caught Miss Raman's eyes, and a flicker of understanding passed between them. Everyone came together to work through the problem. Only Miss Ramin was aware that it was all fake. Miss Ramin had actually wanted to change the plan and make it a real system failure, wanting the new management to have to rebuild their own database from scratch. Shorelle had advised her against it, insisting that their play act would work just as well, and that in an attempt to punish their usurpers, their loyal customers would be the real ones who would suffer. Miss Ramin had reluctantly agreed. The team worked together, and they had sorted through the problem in a record 11 minutes. Shorelle ended the exercise. She wished she could tell her colleagues how well they had done. This fake program was initially an idea that was tossed around a few years ago when the glitches were quite recurrent. It was initially suggested as one of the ways to train the team. It was a drill of some sort, and she was happy that it had finally been put to good use. What a day it had been. Exhausted, but triumphant, Shorelle finally had a moment to herself. She opened the book once more. The great hall was in an uproar. Gormick was in chains, his plot exposed. Tahan stood before Eira and Orplan, his expression unreadable.
You saved my life,
he said slowly.
Why?
Eira stepped forward, her chin held high. Because it was the right thing to do, my lord, and to show you that our people are not your enemies. We can be valuable allies, as I told you some time ago, if only you would give us the chance. Tahan was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed.
Well played, my dear. Very well played indeed. You have a wise head on your shoulders.
Shorelle smiled, closing the book gently. She looked up to Miss Raman, approaching, a cautious smile on her face. The new management saw firsthand how vital our team is, Miss Raman said excitedly. You might have just saved a lot of jobs today. They're reconsidering the layoffs. Can you imagine? Yeah, they're reconsidering. Shorelle nodded, relief washing over her. Sometimes, she said, thinking of Eira and Orplan, you have to create your own opportunities. As she gathered her things to leave, Shorelle noticed something strange. For the first time since she borrowed the book, both titles on the book's cover were clearly and permanently visible. Side by side they stood, and could be read together, Ways of Fate and Whispers of Will. She ran her fingers over the shimmering letters, understanding dawning. Fate and will, chance and choice. Perhaps they weren't opposing forces after all. Perhaps they were complementary ones, weaving together to create the tapestry of our lives. With a smile, Shorelle tucked the book into her bag. She had a feeling its story, like her own, was far from over. But she was happy that finally she understood the message of the book. The following days were a whirlwind for Shorelle. The merger negotiations continued, but with a newfound perspective and respect for her team and their importance. She found herself in meetings she never would have been invited to before, offering insights on how to integrate the old system with the new. During a rare, quiet moment, Shorelle opened the mysterious book once more. Yaira stood beside Tahan as he addressed the city. Her heart pounding with a mix of hope and trepidation. Orplin was there too, now wearing the insignia of Tahan's personal guard, a position earned through his role in foiling Gormic's plot.
People of this great city,
Tahan's voice boomed across the square.
I came here as a conqueror, but I remain as your ally. I present to you Yaira and Orplin, who have shown me the true strength of your people. Together we will forge a new future. There will be a wedding, after all, as you were promised. It is fated, and it will feature Yaira with my official. Cheers to the happy couple, Yaira and the newly knighted Orplin.
As the crowd cheered, Yaira felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had navigated the treacherous waters of fate and emerged victorious. Yet she knew that the real work was just beginning. Shorelle closed the book, pondering the parallels to her own situation. The immediate crisis had passed, but the challenge of merging two companies, two cultures, was only just beginning as well. That evening, Miss Ramin called her.
Shorelle! Shorelle!
She began, her expression serious but tinged with pride.
I want you to lead the integration team for our department. You've shown exceptional insight and outstanding leadership qualities these past few days. I'm proud of you.
Shorelle blinked in surprise. Thank you. Thank you so much, boss. I'll do my best. As she left the office, her mind shone and light-bulbed with plans and possibilities. Shorelle felt a sudden urge to return to the little bookstore, cross paths with stories. She found herself retracing her steps from that rainy day, the book tucked safely in her bag as usual. The little shop looked exactly as she remembered. Dust motes dancing in the fading sunlight. Mr. Theodore glanced up as she entered, a knowing smile on his weathered face.
Ah, young lady, you've returned. I had a feeling you'd be back,
he said. Smitches the hamster perched on his shoulders. Shorelle approached the counter, the book in her hands. "I've come to return this," she said, somewhat reluctantly. "It's been amazing, very enlightening, so helpful. More help than any fictional book has the right to be." Mr. Theodore nodded sagely.
Books often are.
Especially this one.
Did you find what you were looking for?
"I'm not sure I was looking for anything specific," Shorelle admitted, "but I think I found something I really needed." As she handed over the book, their fingers brushed, and Shorelle felt a strange tingling sensation. For a brief moment, her eyes was drawn to a picture of two women on the wall, a photo she hadn't seemed to notice the last time she was there. They looked like twins, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Then she blinked, and her eyes met Mr. Theodore's again. He smiled as he began to return her insurance fee.
"Remember,"
Mr. Theodore said. She waved her hands in an act of refusal and said no, that it wasn't necessary. "Keep the change, sir. Have a good day," Mr. Theodore said as she turned to leave.
"Fate may guide our steps, but it is our choices that help shape our path. Fate may make the road. Fate may construct the road, but we determine how and at what pace we walk on it."
Shorelle nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. As she stepped out the shop, she looked back once more to thank him again. She realized that the book had disappeared from the counter where she'd just placed it. Oh, Mr. Theodore must have really loved that book. He put it aside so lightning fast, she thought to herself. She had walked a few paces from the shop. She turned back to glance at it once more, hoping to commit the name of the shop to memory, deciding that maybe one day she'd return, and she didn't want to forget what it was called. But it seemed like the shop's windows were dark, as if it had been closed for hours. She shook her head, wondering if she was imagining things. She waved it aside, admitting to herself that she was probably just tired from the weeks of work to smooth over the new phase of the merger. She was eager to get home, cozy up with a hot beverage, and maybe another book. As she walked home, Shorelle reflected on the journey she'd been on. She thought about the forces of fate and will, chance and choice, and how they had woven together to bring her to this triumphant moment. The next morning, Shorelle arrived at work with a newfound sense of purpose. As she booted up her computer, she noticed a small, leather-bound notebook on her desk that hadn't been there before. Opening it, she found blank pages, save for an inscription on the first page. To write the next chapter of your story, may you always find the balance between the ways of fate and the whispers of will. The gift hadn't been signed. She thought that maybe it was from Mrs. Raman or one of her other colleagues showing their appreciation for her part in helping save their jobs and their stay at the company. She wondered about it for some time, but the busyness of the day quickly took over, and very soon she forgot about the interesting little note that accompanied the book she had been given. As the workday progressed, she had time to look over at the notebook, and she smiled, running her fingers over the elegant script. She decided to draw on the lessons she had learned over the past few days, and saw the book as perhaps another work of fate, or another way of fate. And she decided to pick up her pen and begin to write. That would be the other part of the equation, penning down her little whispers of will, ready to shape her destiny. Months passed, and the merger was finally complete. The majority of Shorelle's team had not only survived, but thrived through the process, their expertise continuing to prove invaluable in the transition. Many members of the new team had remarked how lost they would have all been. They were grateful that the initial plan had changed. As she packed up her old office, preparing to move to a new floor, Shorelle came across the leather-bound notebook that she had gradually been filling up. She opened it, smiling at the pages now filled with notes, ideas, and the occasional doodle. The inscription still shimmered on the first page, a reminder of the strange and wonderful journey that had led her here. As she closed the notebook, she looked around the office and thought about how so much had changed for the better. She tucked the notebook back into her bag. She walked out of the grand building, stepping confidently into the sun as much as into her bright future. Elsewhere in the city, a small little shop appeared only to those who needed it most. A book with 2 titles waiting patiently for the next reader to discover its lessons. And so the story ends. Or does it? The scene shifts back to what had happened that day many months ago when Shorelle had left the shop. Mr. Theodore's smile faded and was replaced by a look of deep contemplation. He watched her look back at the shop. He saw the look of bewilderment come over her. He noticed that she had seen the shop change, knowing that it was an experience that she would probably explain away. The air in the shop seemed to shimmer, and suddenly Suddenly, 2 men appeared, dressed in dark coats, dark hats, and dark glasses.
Well done, Theodore,
said one, an agent.
Indeed,
added the other, a guardian, his own tone reminiscent of falling leaves. Shorelle found what she needed, just as the sisters had hoped. Theodore nodded. stroking smidges absent-mindedly.
It's been a while. How fares the council these days?
The first chuckled.
Both sides, guardians and agents, are kept on their toes. This is a difficult realm to keep in check. Remember that.
Speaking of which, the second interjected. Eira's story served its purpose beautifully. It's remarkable how her tale, lived so long ago, could still resonate with Shorelle in this modern era. She has since rested with her ancestors, but the strength of her story still lives on. Theodore's eyes twinkled.
Ah, yes, Eira. She was quite a remarkable woman. I remember when we first chronicled Eira's story. Dear Shorelle must think it a mere fairy tale.
I think it was smart that one of the sisters removed the part about Orplan's secret betrayal.
One of the men said. They are wise, of course. They only left the parts of the story that Shorelle needed to know to help her properly write her own.
Besides,
The other added.
who knows who Shorelle's story of wit and bravery will help one day.
They proceeded to discuss about how Orplan had actually been in on Gorrick's plan, and that was why he was in the garden that night that Eira accidentally bumped into him. He hadn't been looking for her. He had actually just left the meeting earlier to avoid being seen when he noticed Eira emerge from the secret tunnel. He didn't want his footsteps on the muddied floor to give him away, so he played it off as a chance meeting. The men further discuss and reveal that Orplan had entered an agreement to help get rid of Tahan in exchange for his country's liberation. He had made a deal that would see Gormick become king. Gormick would have the power to withdraw his forces from their country. The men revealed that Orplan had known about the poison in the goblet, but only adjusted the plan when Eira found out and came up with a better strategy. He realized that it was a safer and more foolproof option because he was not always sure that he could trust Gormick to uphold his end of the bargain. He had switched out the poison with one that could make Gormick look more guilty. He had obtained the poison on one of those occasions when he would rendezvous with Gormick to flesh out their plan. The three men spoke about how the council had worked extra hard to ensure that Orplan would be at the meeting where he could chance upon Eira eavesdropping and be redirected in his course.
Fate is indeed like an endless flowing stream,
the first mused,
and the ripples of human will reverberate across its surface, even across time itself.
True, the other added in agreement. Shorelle's choices, influenced by Eira's tale, will have its own far-reaching effects, I hope. Yes, indeed, time has done very well in carrying this story. Hopefully time continues to do that.
Ah!
Theodore chuckled.
The Time Watchers would certainly agree with you there. They've often argued that time itself is the medium that hosts both fate and will.
His two visitors laughed in unison.
That age-old debate.
Perhaps we should save that discussion for another time, yes?
Indeed.
Theodore replied in agreement, his eyes twinkling with mischief.
After all, we have all the time in the world to discuss it. Right, Smithies?
The three shared a laugh, their voices echoing in the small shop that existed between moments, waiting for the next seeker of wisdom and direction to stumble upon its doors. As their laughter faded, so too did the shop, leaving behind only a whisper of possibility on a busy city street, a testament to the intertwining streams of fate and will that shape our lives across all of time. That is the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. I hope you think about it. I hope it was entertaining and educative at the same time. There are so many parallels in both stories. I tried to highlight a few of them. There might be some Easter eggs here and there, so leave a comment below if you can find one or two more instances where the stories mirror each other more than made evident. And also remember to share with me any lessons you may have learned or interesting perspectives. I'll be very glad to hear your opinions. I'll also appreciate hearing if you enjoyed the story and what about it you found most intriguing, fun, confusing, anything that you have to say about the story, please share it down below. You are welcome to share your theories. I'll be happy to read all of them. Please peruse the channel to find something else you might like to watch. Remember to like, leave a comment, share this video with a friend. Do remember also to subscribe. It really helps. Thank you so much. Check back regularly or turn on the notification bell because there are more stories to come. So, I'll close out this video saying bye. Bye for now till we say hi in the next video. If you shall... If you...